If you can't handle the pressure, walk out that door. Ethan Caldwell didn't raise his voice when he said it, but somehow the words rolled across the dining room louder than the piano, louder than the quiet conversations, louder than the sound of crystal glasses meeting polished tables. Every server froze. Every guest looked away. No one wanted to be the next target. The Caldwell House was the kind of restaurant people flew across the country to visit. Perched above the Chicago skyline, wrapped in golden lights and floor-to-ceiling windows, it was a place where athletes, movie stars, and billionaires came to be seen. It was also the place where one man had built a reputation that scared people more than losing their jobs. Ethan Caldwell was 39, rich beyond imagination, and known for expecting perfection from everyone around him. He had built a business empire from almost nothing, buying failing companies and turning them into success stories. Investors admired him. Competitors feared him. Employees whispered about him. There was a story that he once sent back the same cup of coffee 5 times because it was 2 degrees too cold. Another claimed a famous celebrity walked out after Ethan refused to move a reservation by 5 minutes. No one knew which stories were true anymore because they all sounded possible. The staff had learned one simple rule. Do your job. Keep your head down. Never argue with Mr. Caldwell, especially on Friday nights. Friday was when Ethan inspected everything himself. Every fork, every tablecloth, every flower arrangement, every member of the staff. The manager stood near the entrance, checking his watch every few seconds. The cooks worked in silence. The servers moved like dancers trying not to make a mistake. And then the front door opened. Naomi Brooks stepped inside carrying nothing but a small purse and a folder with her paperwork. 26 years old, natural curls pulled back neatly, black uniform pressed without a wrinkle. She looked around the restaurant with calm eyes. It was her first day. The manager hurried over and forced a smile that looked more nervous than welcoming. Listen, he whispered. You're going to hear things about Mr. Caldwell. Most of them are true. Just smile, apologize, and never push back. Naomi nodded politely. I understand. Good, the manager said with relief. Because everyone here is afraid of him. Naomi looked across the room as Ethan stepped out of his private office. Tall, sharp suit, perfect posture. He scanned the restaurant like a general inspecting a battlefield. His eyes stopped on her. You're the new waitress? He asked. Yes, sir. He looked at her name tag for 1 second before speaking again. Around here, mistakes are expensive. I don't tolerate excuses. A few nearby servers lowered their heads. They had seen this before. The new employee would apologize. Promise to work harder. Try to disappear. Naomi simply smiled. That's fair, she said. Ethan folded his arms. And if you can't keep up? The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Naomi met his eyes without raising her voice. Then I'll learn faster, sir. But I won't let fear do my job for me. For the first time that night, the billionaire said nothing at all. And somewhere in the restaurant, someone quietly realized the new black waitress had just done something no one else had dared to do. She had refused to back down. The silence did not last long. The dinner rush arrived like a storm rolling across Lake Michigan. The front doors opened every few seconds. Luxury cars lined the street below. Expensive coats disappeared into the coat room. The scent of fresh bread, roasted steak, and coffee drifted through the air. Naomi Brooks tied her apron one more time and stepped onto the floor. She had worked in busy restaurants before, but nothing like this. At the Caldwell House, every table felt like a business meeting worth millions of dollars. Every guest expected perfection. Every employee expected trouble. The older servers kept stealing nervous glances toward Ethan Caldwell as he walked through the dining room with his hands behind his back. He noticed everything. A crooked candle. A fingerprint on a wine glass. A chair sitting an inch too far from the table. Nobody wanted his attention. Naomi noticed something else. Nobody smiled when he walked by. A young server carrying a tray almost dropped a spoon. Ethan stopped beside him. The young man apologized before anything had even happened. Ethan looked at him for a second. You already think you failed, he said. That is why people make mistakes. The young server nodded quickly. Ethan walked away. Naomi watched the exchange without saying a word. Beside her, another waitress let out a long breath. That was actually a good day, she whispered. You should see him when he is upset. Naomi looked surprised. Does he ever thank anyone? The waitress laughed quietly. I have worked here for 3 years. I have never heard it. Their conversation ended when a family walked through the doors. Naomi greeted them with a warm smile and led them to their table. She answered questions, made recommendations, and somehow managed to calm a nervous little boy who could not decide what to order. His parents thanked her. The child smiled. Across the room, Ethan noticed. He did not say anything, but his eyes followed her for a moment before he turned back to the manager. The night grew busier. Naomi carried plates, filled glasses, and learned the rhythm of the restaurant. She memorized table numbers, guest preferences, special requests. She listened more than she spoke. She noticed that the kitchen staff trusted each other. The hosts helped the bartenders. The busboys watched out for the servers. Everyone worked together except when Ethan entered the room. Then conversation stopped. Laughter disappeared. Naomi reached for a coffee pot when an older dishwasher named Henry walked by. "First day?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Henry smiled. "Do not let this place fool you. The people here are good people. They just forgot what it feels like not to be afraid." Naomi poured another cup of coffee. "Maybe they have a reason." Henry looked toward Ethan, who was studying a reservation list. "Maybe he does too." Before Naomi could answer, the manager rushed over. A last-minute reservation had arrived. 12 guests. Important investors from New York. Ethan wanted his best staff handling the table. The manager looked around the room and then pointed at Naomi. The nearby servers stared at him in disbelief. "Me?" Naomi asked. "Mr. Caldwell requested you," the manager said. A strange feeling settled over the room. The older servers looked sorry for her. Henry slowly shook his head. Ethan stood at the far end of the dining room waiting. His expression gave nothing away. Naomi took a slow breath, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the table while every employee in the restaurant silently wondered if the new waitress had just been handed an opportunity or a test. Naomi could feel dozens of eyes following her as she crossed the dining room. The investors from New York had just taken their seats, dark suits and expensive watches catching the glow of the chandeliers. They spoke in low voices about stock prices, construction projects, and numbers bigger than most people could imagine. Ethan Caldwell stood beside the table with his hands in his pockets, waiting for her to arrive. The manager looked nervous enough to forget how to breathe. The older servers quietly stepped aside. Naomi stopped in front of Ethan. "Sir?" she asked. Ethan looked at her for a long second. "You told me fear does not do your job for you." Naomi answered calmly. "Yes, sir." "Good. This table expects perfect service. If they leave disappointed, they will not come back. Neither will you." A few guests heard the exchange and looked uncomfortable. Naomi simply nodded. "I understand." Ethan stepped away without another word. One of the investors smiled politely. "Looks like you have quite the boss." Naomi picked up a water pitcher. "Looks like you have quite the view tonight, sir." The man laughed, and the tension around the table softened. Naomi moved from guest to guest with quiet confidence. She remembered names, refilled glasses before anyone asked, recommended dishes based on what people liked instead of what cost the most. She noticed one guest avoiding dairy products and made sure the kitchen knew. Another preferred sparkling water without ice. By the time appetizers arrived, the table had stopped talking about business and started talking to each other. Across the room, Ethan watched without changing his expression. The manager walked beside him. "She is doing well," he whispered. Ethan did not answer. His eyes stayed on the table. Half an hour passed. The restaurant filled with the comfortable sound of laughter and conversation. Then one of the investors reached into his pocket and frowned. He checked his jacket, his chair, the floor beside him. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think I lost my wallet." The conversation stopped immediately. The wallet was no ordinary wallet. According to the guest, it contained identification cards, credit cards, and a small flash drive with important business information. Chairs moved back. People stood up. The manager rushed over. Ethan arrived seconds later. "Lock the doors," one investor suggested. "Nobody leaves until we find it." A nervous silence spread across the restaurant. Several employees looked terrified. Ethan glanced across the room. "Search every station," he ordered. Naomi stood perfectly still. She looked at the table. She looked at the floor. Then she looked at the investor. "Sir," she said softly, "may I ask you a question?" The man looked frustrated. "Go ahead. Did you use your phone after you sat down?" "Yes." "And did you take your jacket off before or after that?" The man stopped to think. "After." Naomi smiled gently. "Would you mind checking the inside pocket of your coat one more time?" The investor sighed and reached for the expensive coat hanging behind his chair. His hand disappeared into an inner pocket. A second later, his eyes widened. He slowly pulled out the wallet. The entire table stared at him. I could have sworn it was not there, he admitted. Relief spread across the room. A few people laughed. The manager almost collapsed into a chair. Ethan looked at Naomi. How did you know? Naomi answered honestly. I saw him put his phone away. The pocket looked too small for both. I thought he might have moved the wallet without noticing. One of the investors smiled at Ethan. You hired a sharp one. Ethan looked at Naomi for another long second. No, he said quietly. I do not think I know what I hired yet. The investors finished their dinner in better spirits than anyone expected. Handshakes replaced worried faces, and the missing wallet quickly became a joke shared around the table. As they prepared to leave, one of the guests stopped beside Ethan Caldwell. You should hang on to that young lady, he said with a smile. People can teach service, but they cannot teach good judgment. Ethan thanked the man with a polite nod, but his expression never changed. Naomi watched from across the room as the expensive cars disappeared into the Chicago night. The manager walked over carrying a small notepad. Naomi, he whispered. That was incredible. Before she could answer, Ethan's voice cut through the room. My office. 5 minutes. Every employee nearby stopped moving. The older waitress from earlier looked at Naomi with sympathy. Henry quietly shook his head again. Do not worry, he said. Sometimes storms pass by. Sometimes they stop right over your house. Naomi smiled politely and made her way to the office. Ethan was standing by the window overlooking the city. The lights below stretched for miles. He did not turn around when she entered. Close the door. Naomi did. A few seconds passed before he spoke. Do you know why I asked for you to serve that table? No, sir. Because everyone else was afraid to make a mistake after what happened with the lost wallet. Fear creates carelessness. Naomi listened quietly. Ethan finally turned toward her. You stayed calm. That impressed me. Naomi was surprised by the compliment. Thank you, sir. Ethan folded his arms. Do not misunderstand me. One good decision does not prove anything. I understand. Tomorrow night, there is a private charity dinner. 100 guests, business leaders, judges, and community sponsors. I expect flawless service. You will handle the head table. Naomi blinked. On my second day? Do you think you cannot? Naomi thought for a moment before answering. I think I can learn. Ethan nodded once. Good. Be here at 3 in the afternoon for preparation. As Naomi left the office, she noticed several employees waiting outside. The manager hurried over. Are you all right? I think so. Did he fire you? Naomi laughed softly. No. Henry walked over carrying a stack of clean glasses. That means he gave you more work. When Naomi explained the assignment, the group fell silent. The older waitress looked worried. The head table is impossible. Why? Naomi asked. Because Mr. Caldwell sits there. If one thing goes wrong, everyone notices. The next afternoon arrived with gray clouds hanging over the city. Naomi arrived early as requested. She expected to find a busy restaurant. Instead, she found Ethan himself arranging place cards across the head table. He looked up when she entered. You are 10 minutes early. I was taught that being on time means arriving early. Ethan slid a place card across the table toward her. Then tell me what is wrong with this seating arrangement. Naomi studied the names. Business leaders, local officials, donors, families. She looked at the chart for nearly a minute. Ethan waited without speaking. Finally, Naomi pointed to 2 names. These guests should not sit together. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? One runs a youth charity. The other closed a neighborhood center last year. They argued about it in the news. If they sit together, everyone else at the table will feel uncomfortable. Ethan looked back at the chart. His eyes narrowed. You read the local papers? Naomi smiled. My grandmother always said that serving people starts with knowing people. Ethan slowly picked up the place cards and switched them without another question. But for the second time since she arrived, the man who made an entire restaurant nervous found himself wondering how the newest waitress in the building kept seeing things that everyone else missed. The charity dinner arrived with the first cold rain of the season tapping against the windows of the Caldwell house. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft candlelight and fresh white flowers. Volunteers from local organizations stood beside business leaders. Teachers sat near company owners. Families who had helped build the neighborhood shared the room with people who could afford to buy half the city. Naomi Brooks looked across the dining room and remembered every face from the seating chart. Ethan Caldwell stood near the entrance greeting guests with the same calm expression he wore every day. When he caught sight of Naomi, he checked his watch. "You are early again." Naomi smiled. "I was hoping that would stop surprising you, sir." Ethan almost answered, but another guest arrived and pulled him away. Henry passed by carrying polished silver trays. "I think he was trying to make a joke," he whispered. Naomi laughed softly. "Then we should not interrupt the moment." The evening started perfectly. Guests found their seats without confusion. The kitchen stayed ahead of schedule. The music floated gently through the room. Naomi moved between tables with quiet confidence, introducing guests to one another and making sure every small detail felt effortless. Then the front doors opened again. A distinguished older gentleman stepped inside with a young woman and a teenage boy. The manager hurried toward Naomi. "We have a problem," he whispered. Their reservation was confirmed, but we do not have enough seats at the head table. Naomi looked at the room. Every chair was filled. The manager looked ready to panic. "Mr. Caldwell is going to blame somebody." Naomi glanced toward Ethan. He was speaking with donors across the room and had not noticed the situation yet. The older gentleman smiled kindly. "Young lady, if there is no room, my family can leave. We do not want to cause trouble." Naomi shook her head. "Please give me 1 minute, sir." She studied the table. Then she noticed something. 2 guests had accepted invitations separately even though they worked for the same company and spent most events together. Across the room, a couple celebrating an anniversary had quietly mentioned they preferred a more private table by the windows. Naomi walked over and spoke with them. They smiled immediately. "A quieter table sounds wonderful," the husband said. Within moments, Naomi rearranged the seating without making anyone feel moved or forgotten. The older gentleman and his family took their places at the head table. The anniversary couple enjoyed a better view of the skyline. Nobody complained. Ethan noticed the changes only after dinner service resumed. He called the manager over. The manager pointed toward Naomi. Ethan walked across the room. Several employees held their breath. "Who approved the seating change?" he asked. "I did, sir," Naomi answered. "Without asking permission? There was not enough time to interrupt your conversation, and I believed everyone would have a better evening this way." Ethan looked around the room. The anniversary couple were smiling at the city lights. The older gentleman was laughing with community leaders. The atmosphere felt warm and natural. Ethan turned back to Naomi. "And what if someone had been offended?" Naomi answered without hesitation. "Then I would have apologized and fixed it. But kindness usually gives people a better choice than inconvenience." Before Ethan could respond, the older gentleman stood and raised his glass. "Mr. Caldwell," he called out, "I have attended charity dinners for 20 years. This young lady just gave my family the warmest welcome we have ever received. You should be proud of your staff." The entire room applauded. Ethan looked at Naomi, then at the guests, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the man who expected perfection found himself standing in the middle of a dining room where respect had been earned by someone else. The applause faded, but the feeling stayed in the room. Guests returned to their conversations with brighter smiles, and the charity dinner carried on as though nothing unusual had happened. Only the staff knew better. They had just watched Ethan Caldwell stand quietly while someone else became the center of the evening. Naomi picked up an empty tray and continued working as though the applause had been meant for someone else. Henry met her near the kitchen doors. "You know what the strangest part was?" he whispered. Naomi smiled. "What is that?" Mr. Caldwell did not correct anybody. Naomi looked across the room. Ethan was speaking with donors again, but every few minutes his eyes drifted back toward the dining room, checking the service, checking the guests, and somehow always finding her. The evening moved smoothly until a member of the kitchen staff hurried toward the manager. The color had drained from his face. The manager listened for a few seconds and then looked toward Ethan. Naomi noticed the change immediately. Something was wrong. Ethan crossed into the kitchen. The manager followed. A few moments later, raised voices filled the hallway. Not angry voices. Worried voices. Henry walked out carrying an empty serving tray. "The main dessert shipment never arrived," he said quietly. The delivery truck broke down across town. Naomi looked at the clock. Dessert was supposed to be served in less than 20 minutes. The special dessert had been advertised for weeks. Local newspapers had even mentioned it in stories about the charity event. Ethan stood in the kitchen studying a list of options. What do we have? He asked. A chef shook his head. Not enough to serve 100 guests. Another cook suggested sending someone to another bakery. The manager looked outside. The rain had become heavier. Traffic reports on the radio warned of delays across the city. Ethan rubbed his forehead. We cannot keep our guests waiting for an hour. The kitchen grew quiet. Naomi looked around the room. She noticed trays of fresh fruit. Small cakes prepared for private orders. Ice cream waiting in freezers. Chocolate decorations ready for tomorrow. She took one careful step forward. Sir. Ethan looked up. What? May I make a suggestion? The chefs exchanged nervous looks. Ethan folded his arms. Go ahead. What if we stop trying to replace the missing dessert? Ethan frowned. Then what do we serve? Naomi pointed toward the kitchen. Something unique. Build small dessert samplers using what we already have. Fresh fruit, cakes, chocolate, ice cream. Every table receives a different combination. Guests can share with each other. It becomes part of the evening instead of a problem. One of the chefs blinked. We actually have enough for that. Another nodded. And we could plate them in 10 minutes. Ethan looked around the kitchen. Everyone suddenly had an idea. Everyone was moving. The silence had disappeared. Do it, he said. The staff rushed into action. Plates filled the counters. Chocolate drizzles. Fresh berries. Tiny pastries. Ice cream scoops. Mint leaves. The kitchen moved with new energy. 20 minutes later, the desserts reached the dining room. Guests smiled as servers explained that every table had received its own special assortment created just for the event. People traded bites with friends. They compared favorites. Laughter spread across the room. One donor stood and raised his fork. Mr. Caldwell, he called out. This is the most creative charity dinner I have ever attended. More applause followed. Ethan looked toward the kitchen doors where Naomi stood quietly beside Henry. Henry grinned. You saved the night again. Naomi shook her head. No. Everyone did their part. Ethan walked over slowly. The staff stepped aside to let him pass. He stopped in front of Naomi. You turned a mistake into something better, he said. Naomi answered softly. Sometimes people remember the surprise more than the plans, sir. Ethan looked around at the smiling guests and the busy staff. For a moment, the hardest man in the restaurant seemed to forget about perfection and wonder if he had spent too many years overlooking the people standing closest to him. The charity dinner ended with handshakes, photographs, and promises to meet again next year. The last guests drifted into the rainy Chicago night while the staff began clearing tables. Glasses clinked softly. Chairs slid across the floor. The kitchen finally grew quiet. Naomi Brooks stacked a tray of empty dessert plates when she noticed something unusual. Ethan Caldwell was still there. Most nights, according to Henry, the billionaire left the second the last guest walked out the door. Tonight he stayed. He stood near the window looking at the city lights reflecting off the wet streets below. The manager approached him with a smile. Sir, tonight raised more money than any charity dinner we have ever hosted. Ethan nodded. Good. Several guests asked about the dessert idea. Good. And 3 of them specifically asked about Naomi. Ethan looked across the room. Naomi was helping another server carry heavy trays back to the kitchen even though her own work was finished. What did they ask? Ethan said. They wanted to know where you found her. Before the manager could say another word, the older gentleman from the head table walked back through the front doors. His family stood behind him. I hope I am not interrupting, he said. Ethan walked over and shook his hand. Not at all. The gentleman smiled and looked around the room. I forgot to thank someone. He walked straight toward Naomi. She looked surprised. Sir. The man reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small business card. My name is Walter Green. I run a community scholarship foundation. Naomi looked at the card politely. Walter smiled. During dinner, my grandson told you he wanted to study engineering but was worried about paying for college. Naomi nodded. Yes, sir. You spent 10 minutes encouraging him while everyone else was busy. The teenage boy stepped forward. You told me not to let money decide my future. Naomi smiled. I believe that. Walter looked at Ethan. Do you know what impressed me the most tonight? Ethan waited for the answer. Not the food. Not the decorations. Not even the charity auction. Your waitress treated a nervous teenager like he mattered. The old man turned back to Naomi. How did you know so much about engineering? Naomi hesitated for a second. Henry stopped working. The manager looked up. Even Ethan seemed curious. I studied it for 2 years, Naomi answered quietly. I had to leave school to help my family. Walter looked genuinely surprised. Engineering? Naomi nodded. I still read the books when I can. Henry smiled to himself. Suddenly, little things started making sense. The careful observations. The quick solutions. The calm under pressure. Ethan folded his arms. You never mentioned that during your interview. Naomi looked at him. You never asked, sir. For a moment, nobody spoke. Walter laughed first. Fair enough. He looked at his grandson. See? Talent does not always wear a suit. The teenage boy shook Naomi's hand and thanked her again. As the family left, Walter stopped beside Ethan. His voice was low but clear enough for Naomi to hear. Young man, you built a beautiful restaurant, but do not make the mistake of believing the building is your greatest investment. The people inside it are. Ethan watched the doors close behind the family. He looked back at Naomi, who had already picked up another tray and gone back to helping the staff clean up. She had not asked for attention. She had not talked about herself. She had not tried to impress anyone. Somehow that made the truth even harder to ignore. Henry walked beside Ethan carrying a box of clean glasses. Funny thing about people, the old dishwasher said with a grin. Sometimes the quiet ones are carrying dreams bigger than the loud ones. Ethan did not answer. He simply watched Naomi laughing with the rest of the staff, and for the first time in many years, the man who believed he could judge people in a matter of seconds realized he had been completely wrong about someone standing right in front of him. The charity dinner became the talk of Chicago before the weekend was over. Local newspapers praised the event for raising record donations. Social media filled with photographs of the unique desserts and smiling families. Guests called the Caldwell house asking when the next community dinner would take place. The restaurant had never received so much positive attention from a single evening. The staff noticed something else. Ethan Caldwell seemed different. Not completely different. He still arrived early. He still expected high standards. He still checked every detail before the doors opened. But now he watched people instead of only watching mistakes. Naomi Brooks noticed the change too, although she never mentioned it. Monday afternoon arrived with bright sunshine and a full reservation book. The restaurant was preparing for another busy night when a black luxury car stopped outside. A woman in a navy business suit stepped out carrying a leather folder. She walked into the restaurant and asked to speak with Ethan. The manager showed her to the office. 10 minutes later, Ethan walked back onto the floor with a serious expression. Naomi, he called. She walked over. Yes, sir. I need you in the office. Henry looked up from polishing glasses. Well, he whispered, either you are getting promoted or the world is ending. Naomi smiled and followed Ethan. The woman stood and offered her hand. Naomi Brooks? My name is Jennifer Lawson. I work with the Green Scholarship Foundation. Naomi recognized the name immediately. Walter Green, the older gentleman from the charity dinner. Jennifer opened the folder. Mr. Green was very impressed by you. He asked us to review your academic history. Naomi looked confused. Ethan stayed quiet. Jennifer smiled warmly. We found your old engineering records. Outstanding grades. Strong recommendations. You left school because of family responsibilities. Naomi nodded. Yes, ma'am. Jennifer slid a document across the desk. Our foundation would like to offer you a full scholarship to finish your degree whenever you are ready. Naomi stared at the paper without speaking. Books, tuition, and expenses, Jennifer continued. Everything is covered. Tears filled Naomi's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. That is very generous. Jennifer smiled. Mr. Green believes communities grow stronger when good people are given another chance. Naomi looked down at the offer. Then she looked up at Ethan. I cannot accept right away. Jennifer seemed surprised. May I ask why? Naomi smiled gently. The restaurant has been good to me. I made a commitment. I would want to finish what I started here. Ethan looked at her with genuine surprise. Jennifer closed the folder. You do not have to answer today. The opportunity will be waiting. After she left, the office became quiet. Ethan stood by the window. Naomi held the scholarship papers in her hands. You should take it, Ethan finally said. Naomi looked at him. You think so? Ethan nodded slowly. I built my career because people opened doors for me. I forgot that not everyone gets the same chances. Naomi smiled. My grandmother used to say that success means holding the door open for the next person. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. Your grandmother sounds wiser than most business leaders I know. Before Naomi could answer, the manager rushed into the office. Mr. Caldwell, you need to see this. He handed Ethan a newspaper. The front page showed a photograph from the charity dinner. There was Ethan greeting guests. There was Walter Green shaking hands with donors. But the largest picture showed Naomi kneeling beside Walter's grandson, smiling as they talked. The headline read, "The waitress who made everyone feel welcome." Ethan read the story silently. It did not mention the billionaire owner. It did not praise the expensive restaurant. It talked about kindness, patience, and the young waitress who made strangers feel like family. Ethan folded the newspaper carefully and looked at Naomi. The hardest lesson of his career had not come from a boardroom or a business deal. It had arrived wearing a black apron and carrying a serving tray, and he was finally beginning to understand that the strongest people in the room were not always the ones with the most money. The newspaper stayed on Ethan Caldwell's desk for the rest of the week. Every morning, he walked past the photograph of Naomi Brooks talking with a nervous teenager. Every afternoon, another customer mentioned the story. Some came to eat because they had heard about the restaurant. Others came because they wanted to meet the waitress who had made a stranger feel important. Naomi treated every guest the same way she always had. She greeted families with a smile. She remembered names. She carried trays, cleared tables, and thanked people for coming. She never mentioned the scholarship. She never talked about the newspaper. She simply went to work. One evening, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. The restaurant was still quiet. Henry was arranging glasses behind the bar. The manager was checking reservations. Naomi was setting the head table for the night. Ethan walked toward her carrying a small envelope. The staff stopped what they were doing. "Naomi," he said. She looked up. "Yes, sir." Ethan handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter with the Caldwell House logo. Naomi read it carefully. Her eyes widened. "Assistant Community Events Director," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Part-time. Flexible hours. You can continue serving if you want, but this position will help you organize our charity dinners and neighborhood programs." Naomi looked surprised. "Sir, I am not sure I am qualified." Henry laughed from across the room. "That is the funniest thing I have heard all week." A few employees smiled. Ethan looked at Naomi. "You have already done the job. You brought people together. You solved problems. You reminded this restaurant why it exists." Naomi looked down at the letter again. "I would like to accept." Ethan smiled. It was small and brief, but the entire staff noticed it. The manager almost dropped his reservation book. Henry quietly clapped his hands. A few weeks passed. The scholarship remained waiting for Naomi, and she decided to continue her education one class at a time while helping with the restaurant's community projects. The Caldwell House started hosting free career nights for local students. Scholarship workshops filled the private dining room. Families who had never stepped inside the restaurant before now felt welcome. One Saturday afternoon, Walter Green returned with his grandson. They walked through the front doors and stopped in surprise. Teenagers were talking with business owners. College students were sharing advice with younger children. Volunteers handed out information about internships and training programs. Walter smiled. "Looks like someone has been busy." Ethan walked over and shook his hand. "We had some good ideas around here. We just needed the right person to remind us to use them." Walter looked toward Naomi, who was helping a young student fill out a scholarship application. "I had a feeling she would." As the event ended, Ethan found Naomi standing by the windows overlooking the city. Chicago sparkled under the evening sky. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Naomi smiled. "Of course. Why did you never walk away?" "The first day we met, I was not exactly easy to work for." Naomi laughed softly. "My grandmother had another saying." Ethan waited. "She used to tell me that some people build walls because they think it keeps them safe. The kindest thing you can do is knock on the door instead of turning around." Ethan looked out at the city lights for a long moment. "I spent years trying to make people respect me by making them afraid." Naomi folded her hands. "And did it work?" Ethan smiled. "Not nearly as well as I thought." The dining room behind them filled with laughter from students, families, and employees sharing dessert together. Henry turned off the last chandelier and shook his head with a grin. Ethan Caldwell had enough money to buy almost anything he wanted, but the greatest change in his life arrived carrying a serving tray on her first day of work, and the lesson she left behind was simple. Fear can control a room for a moment, but kindness can change it forever.